Jane Hershey here, and we're going to start in just a minute. It's great to see so many people logged on, including our teachers who are presenting lessons today. So we'll start in just a minute. In the meantime, if you would use the chat box down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen when you click Send to Everyone, and let us know who you are and where you're from. And I see a lot of names up here and participants, so put your name down there in the chat box, and we'll start our presentation in just a minute. Okay, everyone, welcome to CitySprouts Teacher Forum. We're delighted that you're here with us. This is the fourth of our sessions this fall, and our first season of providing this forum for teachers to share their garden-based lessons, whether those lessons are in the garden or in the classroom, but as we've been seeing from presentations, they're usually both. We're looking forward to your questions and hoping to provide a place for you all to meet each other who are actively engaged in using your school garden for teaching practice. My name is Jane Hershey, and I am the Executive Director, the Founding Director of CitySprouts School Garden Program in Cambridge and Boston Public Schools. We've been working with Cambridge Public Schools since 2001 and added Boston Public Schools 2 years ago. And our mission is to build schools' capacity to integrate edible gardens as an instructional resource for teachers and to connect young people to nature where they live, and that includes the food systems. And we're part of the new wing of garden-based learning, which is really trying to integrate what teachers do as well as the wonderful things that students find to eat in that garden. So really trying to integrate edible education with the core lessons that teachers have to teach and that we want all kids to learn. So we're glad that you're with us today, and we're really looking forward to our conversation about garden-based teaching. I have just a couple of things to present to you before we start. As I said, the forum is meant to be a place for teachers to be sharing their garden-based lessons. Each session focuses on a core subject, and the one today is using the harvest in the classroom. How do you use that harvest to make the lessons that you're teaching in writing, in science, and math come alive for kids? We've got 3 teachers who are working with us today, presenting their lessons with us today, and we're hoping that we get a lot of questions and comments from those of you who are listening in. Before we get to our 3 teachers, though, I have just a couple of reminders regarding our webinar platform. We are recording today's session, and the recording will be posted on our website, along with the 3 previous sessions in this fall series. So you can go back and find them on the Teacher Forum page of our website, citysprouts.org, and then we'll show you what that looks like at the end of the session. We have a lot of people on this call today, I'm delighted to say, and we've muted everyone's audio except for our presenters, and that's just to limit the background noise. However, this forum is really about your questions and comments and your shared experience. So we're really, really encouraging you, everyone, to use that chat box down on the bottom right-hand side. When we get to the point for questions, I'm going to be your voice, and I'm trying to not lose any questions at the bottom, but to say them out loud for our teachers to respond to. If you've got things to respond to, please write them in there, and I'll get them out audioly as well as visually. And if you haven't already, start using that chat box just to sign in and tell us who you are. And thank you for all of those who've been doing that so far. Okay, so moving on to our wonderful teachers for today. We've got 3 younger grade teachers. Caitlin O'Donnell from the Fletcher Maynard Academy in Cambridge, who teaches 1st grade. Therese Bellino, a kindergarten teacher at the Morse School. I think she's a junior kindergarten teacher, but she'll correct me soon when she's on, if I'm wrong. And Megan Cahill, who teaches just about that same age group in our public Montessori school in Cambridge at the Tobin School. So we are going to start with Caitlin talking about these lessons. And I just want to encourage all of you who are listening in, if you haven't been part of our sessions up till now, you'll see that actually a lot of these lessons that younger teachers do, older grade teachers respond to and say, I do some version of that as well. So we'd really like to hear whether or not you're teaching these same grades as Caitlin, Therese, and Megan, how you've used that or questions you have about using these same ideas for older grades. Okay, and I'm going to welcome Caitlin O'Donnell. Caitlin, it's great to have you with us. I am a great fan of yours. I've seen you teach, and we're really thrilled that you're here to share your lesson with other teachers as well. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, Jane. Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Caitlin O'Donnell, and I'm a teacher at Fletcher Maynard Academy. I teach 1st grade. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I'm actually still in school right now. And our bell may ring at 3:45, so if I'm not done by then, there could be a lot of noise, so I'll do my best to shout if necessary.
Well, you're just keeping it real for us, Caitlin.
Everyone can hear, but who knows what it's going to be like. So I have to give everybody a little background about my history as a teacher who uses the garden. I have what could, I think, fairly be called a tumultuous relationship with the garden. Like, it didn't start off very, it started off as a somewhat difficult relationship. I knew I should be in the garden, but I couldn't figure out how to get my kids out there. I wasn't a gardener. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't figure out how to make the science curriculum fit with the garden curriculum. And I was kind of overwhelmed with the added idea of planning extra lessons. So for a long time, I didn't take my kids into the garden very much. And over time, and with the support of some really patient garden coordinators, my perspective began to shift. And instead of focusing so much on how to use the garden for science, which I still do, but I started thinking about it more as more through an ELA lens. And I realized that the garden provided really rich material for students to write about in a variety of genres. For example, students could write narratives about looking for bugs and worms. They could write procedural texts about how to plant a seed or how to weed. They could write persuasive letters about what should be grown in the garden next year. So they could write a lot in a lot of different genres, and as we know, the Common Core is really pushing us to think about how students should write across genre. But one of the other things that students are really being asked to do now, and this is a challenge in the younger grades, I think, was to think about research and participate in shared research and writing projects. So previously, I haven't done a lot of research in 1st grade. I mean, we've read a lot of books and we've talked about them and we've had experiences, but I never really thought about it in terms of research. And so now, with the Common Core, I think I'm thinking more about how to get my kids to do research with me, shared research, how to answer questions, and then how to make that research really experience-based rather than text-based. Of course, we're still reading books that support our experiences, but how to get the kids out doing things and then thinking about how to share that work and take notes. So the Common Core standards you see are the standards that I was really focusing on with this activity, which is participating in shared research and writing projects, and then recalling information to answer a question. So that's kind of like note-taking. So the activity that I chose for this research and writing goal was cider making, which many of you may have done before, or some of you may get to do this fall. It's one of the best activities. It's so fun. The kids love it. And the garden coordinator is an amazing resource for this activity. I think it would be really hard for a teacher to do this on their own. And the garden coordinator really helped provide some materials, although I also brought knives and bowls and apples and hand sanitizer. And this is, I think cider making is best organized through group rotation, so through centers. So each of the groups works at one station at a time. In order to do this, you can see the materials there: apples and tables, bowls and buckets, an apple grinder, a press, table knives, water, hand sanitizer, and cups, and a pitcher for drinking at the end. So during this activity, basically kids go to different stations. A small group of kids will be at the apple washing station. A small group of kids will take the washed apples and cut them into pieces. Another group will grind those pieces into mush. And then the group gathers together and takes turn pressing the apples and creating the cider that they get to drink. So at the end, everybody drinks the cider, and it's a wonderful experience. It's nice how the steps are clearly laid out, and the kids, although you might be at the cutting station first, the kids really understand that the first step is washing, the next step is cutting, the next step is grinding, and so forth. So that after we've had this, really fun experience and everybody loves the cider, then we come in and we have a discussion about the cider making, just so that we get the oral language, students' oral language around the words maybe grinding or cutting or pressing or pushing or swishing, and we talk about it. And after we've talked about it as a whole group, then I send students to tables, and that's where they really do their note-taking. And for us in first grade, note-taking means fast picture drawing, fast sketching. So I gave them strips of paper, and each strip was divided up into 5 boxes because there are 5 steps in the process. And every 2 minutes, I would turn over a timer and I would say, okay, sketch the first step. And I wouldn't remind them what the first step was. At that point, it was up to them to recall the information. But we'd already had the experience and talked about the experience. So for most kids, it was pretty easy to remember, or they could glance over on what a friend was drawing. And you can see here's 2 different kids' versions of what we did. And they look, they're different. Some kids did close-ups, and some kids draw the whole people. And the next day, after kids had taken these notes, I let them use the notes that they had taken. So they took their strip of paper to write directions for someone. So that was the question they were answering, was how to make apple cider. How do you make apple cider? And then they wrote a procedural, basically a 1-page procedural piece. Sorry, something else. So afterwards, students produced a procedural piece of writing, just a 1-page how-to. Although you could make a shared book about it, there's a lot of different ways you could go. And I have to say that every year, students consistently say that cider making is one of their favorite activities. When we go to an apple orchard and they drink cider at the orchard, or they pick apples, there's a strong connection. Kids really see, oh, this is where the apples grow, this is what they look like, this is how we pick them, and this is how we make juice out of them. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for kids to make the farm-to-table connection, but also to learn how to write how-to books, which we then later in the year spend a lot more time focusing on.
Wow, great. Thank you. I'm down here busily writing down the questions that are popping up in the bottom, Caitlin, but that's really wonderful.
Okay. Yep.
And I'm not going to give them to you yet. Yep. We're going to go through and hear Therese's slides. And Mike, if you can hand over the controls, I'm going to pass this off to Therese. But we definitely have got a lot of questions down here, and I'm capturing them. And we're going to come back to these questions after we hear Therese and then Megan. But thank you so much, Caitlin. That was really inspiring. Okay. And Mike, can you pass this over to me or move it on to the next slide?
Hello?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we should get this in just a minute. Okay, and Therese, I think you must have the control. You want to move forward to your slide?
Was it just to myself?
There we go.
There we are. Okay.
Okay, welcome, Therese.
Thank you so much. So I am at the Moore School, and I've currently got a kindergarten cohort. So it is true that I've got a junior kindergarten cohort, but I now have a dedicated kindergarten cohort. So my connection to the garden started at Morse as I was began my teaching there as a special start teacher. So I really viewed the opportunities in the garden to really give the children an opportunity for a sensory-based experience where there are lots of opportunities for them to smell, see, touch, and taste, and have that kind of interactive experience with the garden. As I moved towards the junior kindergarten cohort and kindergarten, I was linking it more to the, threading it through all the academic centers, including English language arts and math and science. So I'm trying to, let's see, excuse me, I'm just trying to find my slides.
Okay, Mike is over there moving you back up to yours, so we'll be just a second. We'll be back on track.
Thank you.
There we go.
So the learning goals, it's definitely dovetailing and echoing what Caitlin was saying, the farm to table, having an appreciation where our food comes from, and then also in the whole group learning experience, having them take place in the center so that they understand the sequencing events, including the same procedural things that Caitlin outlined, with beginning with the washing of the apples. And we also organize it in a similar way where the children are in small groups at stations, and they experience participation all the way to the end, which is the outcome of being able to taste test. So for the junior kindergarten or kindergarten student, this might be their first experience ever seeing an apple core, and they may notice that this segments the apples, and they can count the segments each time. They also learn to cooperate and work safely with some new tools. We typically preview this experience by inviting our coordinator, Brad, to come into the classroom so the children have familiarity with the rules of the garden. And they've also, before they do the apple cider making experience, they know the basic rules, and they're very connected to the garden because they've had multiple visits. So I typically, for the English language arts portion, preview or activate prior knowledge and ask if they have any experiences with apples, apple picking, apple cider making, and we generate a list before we go and have the cider making activity. So we activate prior knowledge and generate a list, and then we go out to the garden and have I'm sorry, I'm trying to click through the slides. So one of the other English language arts pieces for experience for the children are a connection to where the apples come from. We are lucky to have a beautiful apple tree in the garden, and so they can observe this over time. So prior to the apple cider
experience, they have already gone to visit the tree. They have picked a branch and tied either a piece of fabric for themselves or a little tag with their name on it, and they will visit this over time, over the season, to observe and record in their science journals the changes over time. And so then recalling and explaining, after we've had the experience, and as you see in the slide, there are the same centers and procedures that Caitlin was explaining, then we are able to come back and, as a whole language experience on the rug, we do interactive writing to sequence. And in interactive writing in kindergarten, they may just write the beginning letter in a word, and they're recalling the sequence, and then with support from myself, are creating a poster, or this, as you see here, the sentence strips. Now, the sentence strips you see here would come later. That would be in a writer's workshop, but the initial interaction is an interactive writing experience. So also a follow-up activity and would be surveying and graphing. So we can have a center during Reader's Workshop where there's apple taste testing. They can also record these results and make a simple graph. And so it's a highly engaging activity because it's hands-on, it's sensory-based. They're often using some new tools for the first time. They're enjoying being in the garden, and it's also an early enough in the year activity that it really sets a tone for the collaboration and cooperation throughout the school year.
Thank you, Therese. That's really great, and I can't help but noticing the connections, the similarities between some of your activities and what Caitlin is doing, including that using the visual. You have photographs where Caitlin's doing drawings, but it's really interesting that you're both starting with such a visual place for kids to do writing. I love that. And we've got some other questions here too, but we're going to hold those until after Megan. But thank you so much for sharing that lesson. And stay there, don't go away. We're going to come back with some questions for you after we hear Megan. Welcome, Megan. You're up with Carrot Soup.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you. I know it's weird not having answers at the end. So I am at Tobin Montessori, and I teach in the Children's House program, which is children ages 3, 4, and 5. And I feel like when I first started at Tobin, I was similar to Caitlin of not accessing the garden as much as I could and kind of wasn't really sure like how to go about it. And then when I just started going, it was kind of like the garden was inspiring us like through conversation with the kids. And then I feel like a lot of the things that we've done, like sometimes I'll go in with a particular lesson and then other times we'll go and then like great outcomes come from it. So one of them was we made a date to go to the garden with our gardener. And you can see the little picture up first is we went and we harvested some vegetables. And then we used our color tablets to sort the colors of what fruit what colors the vegetables were. And when we were there, we also got a whole bunch of carrots. And so one of the kids, we had made vegetable soup years prior, and they were like, why don't we make carrot soup? So I was like, great. So we made carrot soup, and this was the steps of how. That first we talked to the kids about breaking the stems off the carrots, and then it was a work to scrub the carrots using like tools and, sensory with the water. And then the next step was to peel the carrots. and chopping the carrots and putting the carrots into a pot. And the way we did it was we set up like workstations that each child would take a turn going to. And here we are. We then took it down to the cafeteria and cooked it up and brought it up and brought it to a little like handheld blender I had and pureed it. And then we enjoyed it. And then we realized that with this we could pair it with also some interactive writing. We did like a sign that said that we made carrot soup, and we read some books that I also listed here. And there were just some other things that we could have done with it, of writing like the steps and your own recipes and sketching the carrots in our journal and learning parts of the carrots. And other things that everyone talked about as well was making cider and learning the vegetables' names and feeling them. You can see the little girl on the right has okra, and we just got an okra last week from the garden that he said it was too big to eat, and so we cut it. We had done apple printing, that like when you print an apple and it looks like a star, and when you cut the okra in half and print it, it looks like a star. So that was a neat thing that we've had out. And the same thing that a lot of other people said of counting and color and labeling, sorting. And then I feel like the most important thing, a lot of it is just getting into the garden, where you hear a lot of friends are, you know, getting the language and how to take care of the garden and appreciate our earth and being gentle. And then I just added this cute little thing at the end. If you have a garden in a library, you have everything you need. And that's it.
That's great. Thank you. And Megan, I know you were busy talking, but I'm also reading that chat box down at the bottom, and there were lots of other great books mentioned about teaching from the idea of a stone soup, or teaching around making soup, such as Growing Vegetable Soup by Lois Elhurt. I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah, so it actually was inspired by the kids from that, because I have children for 3 years. One year we did stone soup, and then another year is those two books. And then someone said, we read the book Growing Vegetable Soup, and they were like, let's make vegetable soup. And then when we had all the carrots, they were like, we could make carrot soup. So,
oh, wow, that's amazing. So it really evolved from the reading. That's
really
the literary
yeah.
slice connection.
Yeah, it was really awesome.
Yeah, that's really fabulous. Okay, well, we've got some questions down here, and maybe we'll just start with Megan and then go backwards. But I think there are both questions and some great comments down here. Somebody saying that beets work really well too, as a great sort of adding to children's color palette. So is that something that you've grown and used, Megan?
No. So you can just take a raw beet and do it?
Well, I just know from getting all that beet juice on my hands that it really is quite juicy and colorful.
And you're so pretty.
Yeah, so pretty.
That's a great idea. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, and I love this idea of okra as a teaching tool. You mentioned it for printing, but you also mentioned it as counting, which are two great things to do with okra, which is now too big and tough to eat. That's really nice too. So I have a couple questions here, and maybe these are we'll start with Therese and Caitlin, but Megan, I think that you probably, even though you didn't mention graphing, I don't think you mentioned graphing, maybe you did, but someone on our webinar is interested in how you introduce the concept of graphing to young kids. So Therese and then Caitlin and Megan, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. So I go first?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. So with graphing with the younger friends, a lot of it is you can start with just even simple graphing. Like we did apple tasting the other day, and so we had 3 different apples that we tasted, and then after they thought about which one they liked the best, they put a little sticker up under each column, and then we counted out the stickers under each column, and then circled which one was the most, which one was the least. And it can start as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. And do kids have questions about about graphing? Or Caitlin, maybe you want to respond to that?
Well, I found when I've done graphing, a lot of it has been like related to preference, which for first grade is great because later we do surveys and kids ask each other questions. Sorry, my phone is ringing. My colleague is going to answer it for me.
Can I ask? Please do.
We do the same thing. Like we did a taste test the other day in the garden with like a cucumber and some kale and some chives. And then we did a graph about which was our favorite. So each kid came up and put their initials on a Post-it.
So that sounds like it's a developmental way to approach this for young kids, is to start with what they like or what they don't like.
Yeah. They have a lot of opinions.
May I add that we do for the responsive classroom, we have the morning message, and we typically will ask a yes or no question or something simple that creates a little graph in the morning that they can answer. You know, do you like apples? Yes or no. And then later for the graph for the youngest students might just be 2 bars. You know, do you like red apples or green apples? You know, or Granny Smith, or we'll give them the name of the apple, like a Granny Smith or a Red Delicious. You know, so it starts with 2 columns and then expands. But that's where they get their first experiences with either survey questions or the graphing, where you get the data. Okay, so 8 children liked red apples, and 12 children liked green apples, or something like that.
That's probably really obvious to you all who are with young kids in the classroom, but it's a really helpful piece of background for people who are starting as gardeners moving toward education. So thank you for that. Talking about that. And Therese, there were a couple of other questions here relating to standards that I thought were really interesting. One was how you incorporated starting with activating prior knowledge of kids. And I'm wondering, if you could talk about that for a second.
Well, I actually have one for the reasoning abstractly and quantitatively for the mathematical practice standard 2, which, for example, using numbers and words to make sense of problems. So we also would ask some questions like, I have 2 Granny Smith apples and 3 Red Delicious. How many apples altogether? And they can either represent that with apple stickers or symbols, apple counters, or numerals. In other words, like 2 plus 3 equals 5. And then with help, they can represent it as a sentence. And then also the opposite. I have 2, Granny Smith apples. I have 3 Red Delicious. How many apples altogether? And then the students can come up with counters or unifix cubes and represent them as 2 plus 3 plus 5. So that's an example of linking it to a mathematical standard. The procedure of sort of activating the prior knowledge and generating what they already know, what they want to know, and then coming back and finding out what they've learned is just one of the ELA practices. So.
Great, thank you. Caitlin, we have a connection moving from math to ELA for you. Someone was curious about other ELA connections that you make from garden work. Could you share some of those examples with us?
Oh, yeah. I think one of the things that I realized is that just getting into the garden and doing, like, I asked the garden coordinators if we could just do more work in the garden, like weeding and watering and pulling up stakes in the winter and, doing, like, more work, because that just provides so many opportunities for personal narrative writing. Students can write a story just about weeding the garden, or writing a story about looking for bugs and worms. They can write a personal narrative, a small moment story about getting the garden ready for winter. So there's just, for my kids especially, like if they are mostly going to the park in the evenings, that's their main activity, that they do with their families. Getting into the garden gives them a lot of different experiences that we can do, that they can write about. I have a lot of kids when we write all about books, like nonfiction books, who like to write about all about the garden or all about their favorite thing in the garden, so all about pumpkins or something like that, something they know a lot about. I've had a lot of kids, we always write a friendly letter to the gardener, the garden coordinator at the end of the season. So in fall, we write them a friendly letter, a thank you card, telling them what we enjoyed most. There's, so many opportunities for procedural writing, how to plant a seed, how to pick certain things safely, how to make, popcorn, tons and tons of procedural writing, and, and poetry as well. So you could go out and focus on one thing and imagine that it's something else, or find, we do lots and lots of journaling in our garden journals. In the beginning of the year, it's a lot of scavenger hunts, like a texture scavenger hunt, prickly, soft, smooth, or a scavenger hunt for colors, much like Megan was sharing. We do, search for something with legs, search for something that's an animal without legs, search for something that is non-living or living. So there's just tons and tons of writing opportunities, and I think it's just about getting out there and giving the kids lots and lots of diverse experiences.
Yeah, so Caitlin, here's a question on here asking a little deeper into that, is what would you say to a teacher who's hesitant to take the time to do what you're talking about doing? Which I would say the garden coordinators hear frequently.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm so sympathetic to that, and I have to say that we're so fortunate at SMA to have an extended day, so we do have a bit longer. So I think it does fit naturally into your science time if you have a science time, but I think it can be challenging to get out there during writing workshop, because you really want the kids to spend most of their writing workshop time writing. So I'm really, maybe as part of recess, the last 5 minutes, you could go and look at something in the garden, or spend, just 5 minutes exploring the garden and thinking about it. But I think that's probably the hardest thing for most teachers, is finding the time, and then also just thinking about the planning. Like, you have to plan science and social studies and writing and reading, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is one more thing to plan. And that's why I really wanted to do more simple activities that didn't require as much planning, but just for getting the kids working in the garden for 20 minutes at a time, and then there would be a lot that could come out of that in writing later.
And another related question to that, Caitlin, is drawing before writing. Someone on the webinar asked about, that's interesting. I think what she had done with her second graders, a little bit older, was writing and then drawing. Do you have experience that led you to starting with drawing?
Well, that comes, a lot of Lucy Calkins and a lot of other sort of writing gurus, writing experts say that for young children, drawing is planning. They don't need to do graphic organizers or complicated outlines. They just need to sketch their pictures across pages, or as I did on the strip, because that's really how they can take notes, or that's how they can plan a story or represent a sequence efficiently, is by just quickly sketching it. So that's why for first grade it makes sense. I could understand if a second grade teacher felt like the kids could plan using Post-its, or plan using an outline, or plan using a graphic organizer, then at the end they might want them to draw and really do beautiful work that was very realistic and highly detailed. But I was more using it as a memory tool and as a planning device.
Interesting. Thank you. Megan, we have some questions for you, a lot of questions about color. I think you really sparked something here with your amazing pictures documenting your work, but also just how you use color. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that's in the Montessori curriculum, or maybe in the district standards, or how that plays sort of conceptually in your teaching.
Sure. So a part of our Montessori materials are the color boxes. And so there's one color box that is just matching the primary colors. And then the picture in my slide is color box 2. And then there's color box 3 that is grading from darkest to lightest. So, after children have mastered their colors, we try to look for ideas of ways to, kind of reintroduce work and get them excited about it again. And we were thinking, what a great way to bring it in to connect like from the sensorial area and connect that with the garden work. And so we started doing that, and they loved it. And then after that, then they were counting like how many things were orange and how many things were green. And it just kind of like took a little bit of a life of its own. And like one little child like made a poster with like orange and then drew like how many carrots we had. And like for green, I think, again, it was okra, like how many okras we had. And yes, that's what we did.
That's great.
I have to say, it's so hard for me to talk like flowing when I'm not looking at somebody.
Yeah, I know. It's a very odd
I'm like
thing.
really struggling, so I'm so sorry. I sound like it's awkward to me.
Well, I can assure you that lots of people are listening to you, and you sound very relaxed and natural. It's taken me a while to get used to that, too. I appreciate this chat box down here, which reminds me that people are listening. And I just will stop for a second and say I see that Nilsa Maloney had a question, and lots of people jumped in to respond to you, Nilsa, and I hope you got the information you needed. But if not, give us an email afterwards, and we can try to follow it up and fill in any parts that got left out. Megan, I wanted to ask you another question, which kind of was prompted by something that Therese said about detail, how the garden, and maybe your color work, but other garden activities that you've done too, are intentionally about getting kids to notice and talk about and write about detail.
So how we do that. So I have to say that's not, so I haven't done a lot of garden sketching truthfully with the kids. We've done a lot of just like, I feel like we're being hands-on in there and then taking things from the garden. Like, so I don't know if it's okay to tell you what I did because it's a little bit off topic. I guess the details of what we're noticing of like, we harvested a whole bunch of cherry tomatoes and we talked about like the stems and looked at them and they plucked the stems off. And we actually ended up making salsa. And we did like, we made a whole a recipe with the ingredients and like what we put in it. So I feel like we've done a lot of like, for whatever reason, the garden has encouraged us to do more like cooking and like hands-on things rather than as much as drawing. But that I think is a nice step for me to go to.
Yes, and I think actually I'm talking about detail in a broad sense where even that differentiating colors and hues that you were talking about seems to me like a really important part for kids to be noticing the differences in color. So yes, I was seeing what you were doing just in what you had already described as getting kids to look at that kind of level of detail.
May I add, Jane? Oh, I'm sorry, I did interrupt you. Who's speaking now?
Is this, is that Therese? Come on in and say.
Yes, I wanted to just mention again, I want that it's for my students and I've just really a sensory-based experience also so that they're noticing that sort of those textures and this, exactly what, she was saying about bringing to the cooking too. That's also sensory. That they're noticing textures, smooth or bumpy, or I like this smell or I don't like this smell. It's the little spices and other things that are hands-on. So I think it absolutely lends itself to those bringing some of those materials inside and having those cooking experiences are phenomenal. And then also noticing sort of the changes in the observing it and noticing the changes over time. So how the plants, and the vegetation and the trees and things change over time, I think is something that when I talk about detail, that's what I'm trying to help them notice. And then they can
that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I'm glad you clarified that for me. Because I think like even like the detail of noticing a garden, because I think like the first time a child goes and it's like they'll step on a plant, and then like when you raise their awareness, like, oh, that's a living thing, and then before you know it, they're like their head's like in the dirt, and they were finding like these itty bitty insects and worms, and then they get a magnifying glass and they notice like, oh, looks like the worm has like little lines. So I feel like the more like we're in the garden and in nature, that they're their perspective of the world is becoming more appreciative to like noticing the little details of it rather than like, oh yeah, that's the garden, or, you know, like that's a, like
yes,
they're just, their
agree.
awareness is so heightened.
That's also why I really like, you know, really working with the garden coordinators, because I think that's such an important part, because I also really believe that it's their expertise and to have the children appreciate that there is an expertise in this kind of area, you know, that we can go and observe and we can become you know, experts at it also, but that it's something that, you know, we're very respectful of, and there is a resource where we can do more research, and I just think that it just builds that respect for the garden as an important place, and so.
Yeah, thank you, Therese. That was so much more articulately said than what I was trying to say, but that's just what I meant to say, so thank you for putting words on that. And I hear all of you, all three of you, Caitlin and Therese and Megan, talking about something that's really at the heart of what CitySprouts does, and I think what all garden-based learning is, which is trying to bridge the experience of being outside in nature, edible learning garden, with what we want kids to learn academically in the classroom. And it's not, we don't have a long history of saying just what that should look like, or even being able to talk about it. I think you teachers are really pioneers in this and really pushing forward something that's incredibly important for kids. Because if we don't make those academic connections, then it becomes peripheral to kids' school time. But if we don't make the sensory connections, then it just becomes an academic exercise. So really, you're describing, all three of you are describing ways of moving back and forth between that experience, as Caitlin says, of just being in the garden and putting your hands in the dirt, but then using that as a springboard for other things that we want kids to know, like learning how to be good writers, learning how to notice detail, being able to see and differentiate the enormous hues in the color palette. So I want to thank you all very much for giving us some very practical examples of that. And if there are any other things that you think of later that you'd like to share, send them our way, and we can send them out to the list of everybody who's on this call. Or likewise, other people who are on this call who have other questions or resources to share. We really hope that this forum, just like those experiences for kids, are a springboard for teachers and garden educators to feel your way forward to really weave garden-based learning into public schools. So thank you all very much for being part of this. We're going to just come to the last few slides here as we end up. I want to remind everybody who's on this call that you will get a certificate for having participated. For Cambridge Public School teachers and for Boston Public School teachers, additionally, you can register with your districts to get additional PD credit. Please be in touch with us if you have any questions about that. We know that this webinar platform has been difficult for many teachers to access. So for this fall, if teachers want to go back and watch the archives on our website, be in touch with us about how we can get you credit for that. But we want to be sure that all the people who participated and tried to participate can get credit for being part of the CitySprouts Teacher Forum. We've got just one more session coming up, and I know there are some teachers on here who are fifth grade teachers. Nilsen Maloney, I noticed in your question that that you were a fifth grade teacher, and I want to let you know that we've got a fifth grade and a sixth grade teacher presenting next week. Erin Dukeshire from Boston and Chris Burke from Cambridge. And then we have a third grade teacher too, all talking about using the science instruction in the garden. So that's the last session, but there's one more really important event on November 13th. And that's the forum, and we really would like all of you to come to the forum. Genzyme is hosting it for us. They're providing lovely food and drink, but more importantly, a chance for you all to meet each other. So the CitySprouts Forum is supposed to be helping you build a community of practice, which is so much easier when you can imagine each other's faces. So questions that you have, comments that you want to make, just meeting your fellow teachers, please put this on your calendar and plan to come on Thursday, November 13th. So 2 events. Next Thursday, More Science in the Garden, and then November 13th, a forum at the Genzyme reception. And everybody who's participated so far has gotten a PDF invite of that, but we'll be sending that out again. So here's where that archive is. So you can go to our website, citysprouts.org. Down in the corner of our homepage, you see CitySprouts Teacher Forum, and the archives are there and any information. Any questions? Please don't hesitate to be in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Encourage other teachers to be part of our last session. Let them know there'll be another full session in the spring. And thank you so much to Therese and Megan and Caitlin for sharing your lessons with us today. So goodbye, you all, and I'll look forward to talking with you next Thursday.